superhero movie follows Rick Ricker, a cheap version of Peter Parker, who after being bitten by a radioactive dragonfly, sound familiar? Tries to come to terms with his newly acquired superpowers. Sound familiar? Unpopular and incredibly clumsy, Rick is a high school student who lives with his aunt and uncle. Sound familiar? During a school field trip, it becomes apparent that Rick and his best friend, Trey, are bullied by Lance, the typical school douche, who just happens to be dating Jill, Rick's crush and next-door neighbor. Oof, awkward.
Well, this sucks.
Just like Spider-Man, the school heads to a research laboratory where they exhibit genetically modified animals. The lab is owned by Lance's uncle, Lou Landers, a terminally ill millionaire who dismisses his alarming symptoms as healthy cough blood.
Are you okay?
Yes, this is healthy cough blood.
There, everything that can go wrong for Rick goes even worse than expected. He gets humped by animals, thrown in a huge pile of literal dump, and gets bitten by the infamous radioactive dragonfly. Talk about Murphy's Law. During a small chit-chat with Lou, Rick reveals that both his parents were violently killed 9 years earlier. Give this guy a break, for crying out loud. As Rick gets home, he is barely able to walk straight, which is not really strange for his character, given his insanely clumsy nature. Either way, his exceedingly pale, almost greenish color are throwing some very noticeable red flags.
Attaboy.
Rick's caretakers don't really seem to take notice of his symptoms though. Assuming it was just an hormonal situation, Rick's uncle Albert casually walks into his room with an anatomy book, letting his nephew know that he will now be bleeding once a month. He later realizes it was a wrong book. You don't say. All the while, Lou Landers is attempting to beat his terminal disease with all sorts of widgets we see exclusively in, well, superhero movies. In hopes of restoring his health, Lou gets zapped by a machine that overheats, failing to cure him, but he is granted Green Goblin-esque powers in the process. I guess that's one victory for Lou. He then goes on a murderous rampage and sucks the life out of his employees. How sweet!
It doesn't sound good.
The following morning, Rick decides to Google his symptoms in hopes of getting a better understanding of his intense reaction. We'd all do the same, honestly, as he answers a small survey that insists on calling Rick a virgin. Cheap Peter Parker receives a message from an unknown user who claims to have answers for his symptoms, telling him he will visit in due time. Looks like that goes a little against Internet Safety 101, but he rolls with it. Rick later gets distracted by getting a little peek from Jill, his next-door neighbor, who is currently removing her bra, only to have another bra underneath. That's what you get for being a creep, Rick. You're not even the good guy anymore. Later the same day, the school receives a visit from none other than Stephen Hawking himself, who invites the students to get high. Whoa, impressive.
Impressive.
At this point in time, Rick starts showing stranger symptoms, like having his hands stuck on literally everything he touches. Unfortunately, his hands land on the water fountain, and as he finally manages to detach himself, his arm flies by hitting Lance in the face.
This is not going to end well for me.
This is not going to end well for you, no.
Furious, Lance starts throwing punches and Rick gets stuck to everything, probably causing thousands of dollars worth of property damage. Fun times. After that unfortunate incident, Rick decides is as good a time as any to start testing his newly gained powers. Of course, this includes breakdancing while climbing walls, impressive reflexes, and a horrible failed attempt of saving an old lady from her doom. When he gets home, Rick tells Trey and Uncle Albert, why are they together, about his newfound abilities. There, Rick challenges his uncle to throw as many punches as he like, assuring he won't land one. Of course, Uncle Albert hits Trey and the momentum is lost. Either way, they put them to test and discover he was indeed telling the truth after his uncle stabs him and the knife, instead of puncturing him, is bent. Cool. Upon their discovery, Uncle Albert and Trey excitedly evaluate all the possibilities. Fame, fortune, money, and of course, girls, to put it lightly. Disgusted, Rick walks away from the duo. Wasn't he creeping on his neighbor earlier? Hypocrite, and decides to recall the night his parents died. This is where we take a quick detour from the Spider-Man movies and enter the Batman realm. Just like Batman, the family gets jumped by an unknown assailant while walking. This time around though, Rick attempts to be a hero and save his parents. If you watched a minute of this film, you can guess how that went. Yeah, I guess he technically killed them. After the rather pointless flashback, Jill, who also has troubles at home, pays Rick a visit. Just as they share a moment and sparks start flying between the two, they are interrupted by Lance, who is picking up his girlfriend, Jill, with his expensive-looking car. Quick note, don't hit on girls that are taken. It's rude.
We don't do that here.
Back to the story, frustrated, Rick decides it's about time he gets a car of his own and attempts to ask the bank for a loan. However, he gets rejected for not having a job. Makes sense. Right at that moment, a burglar enters the bank and steals, you guessed it, money. In another attempt of playing hero, Rick lets the robber walk away freely.
Oh, hey, I made the same mistake before when I came in. Thanks.
After being scolded by the bank manager who refuses his loan request, Rick appropriately replies with,
I don't see how that's my problem.
petty, but not gonna lie, it felt kind of warranted. Just as Rick flees the scene, gunshots are heard and there's a commotion outside. Thankfully, it's just a monkey dancing. Not so thankfully, just as he turns the other way, he sees his uncle unconscious on the ground. At the hospital, it is revealed that Uncle Albert is in coma. Guess that's just another traumatic experience for future Rick. Feeling guilty, our not-so-great hero gets a visit from that stranger on the internet we talked about, remember? Turns out it's Professor X. Neat.
It's the coolest.
Professor X takes Rick on a brief tour on the school for the gifted, people with powers to be more specific. During the excursion, we get to see familiar faces like Wolverine, Rogue, and even Storm. Nice. The school's director gives Rick proper superhero advice and tells him to build a costume.
Obviously.
Duh, how didn't we think of that before? Back home, Rick immediately starts sketching and comes up with the final design of his superhero disguise and alias, dubbing himself as the Dragonfly. Finally, Rick starts gaining some recognition as the Dragonfly, getting publicity as the new hero in town and becoming a media sensation. We then make a quick visit to Lou, our villain, who finds out he has to murder at least one person daily in order to stay alive and reach immortality. Sounds reasonable.
Stop it. Get some help.
In order not to be arrested for criminal activity, Lou officially becomes our villain, Hourglass, supervillain suit and all. Later, Rick notices a newspaper advert that pays for the Dragonfly photos. Score for cheap Spider-Man. Of course, Rick takes advantage of the situation and applies, showcasing some of the images he took of the Dragonfly that honestly just look like selfies. The interviewers take notice of that too.
Wow, it's almost like you're the Dragonfly.
However, just before he agrees to the position, Rick has to quickly leave the office as he hears people in distress. Way to ruin your disguise, cheap Spider-Man. This is where the Dragonfly and Hourglass meet. Our villain proudly steals a warehouse full of ceruleum, whatever that means, and as the Dragonfly attempts to stop him, Hourglass confuses and harms our hero, leaving the scene unscathed. Not to be cruel, but Rick really lets everyone get away, doesn't he?
Are we the baddies?
At this point, the media starts to rightfully question the Dragonfly's use in the city. Back home, Aunt Lucille tells Rick to keep his identity a secret because if anyone finds out who he is, the baddies will probably try and hurt the people he loves. Seems obvious, but this takes Rick by surprise, apparently.
Are you crazy? Or just plain stupid?
Later that same night, Rick decides to go to the theater, where Jill works and brings her flowers. She starts suggesting that it looks as if he was holding a secret, but for once in his life, Rick does the right thing and bites his tongue. Just as they part ways, Jill is snatched by a group of men. Finally, the Dragonfly comes in handy and clumsily rescues the damsel in distress. Grateful, Jill thanks the Dragonfly by kissing him, almost imitating the iconic Spider-Man kiss, but misses due to Rick's clumsiness. Either way, good for Rick. Later on at Thanksgiving, Jill decides to spend the holiday at Rick's house due to her turbulent home life. Together, Aunt Lucille and Jill cook dinner until Lance and Lou arrive. Sucks for Rick. The villain and his bully? Rough.
This is the most uncomfortable situation ever.
The Dragonfly starts nonchalantly climbing to his bedroom and heads to the bathroom, right in the middle of doing his business. Lou invasively enters Rick's room. Alarmed as the Dragonfly still has the suit on, our hero starts hiding in strategic positions to avoid getting caught. Lou starts suspecting Rick of his identity, but decides going back downstairs, having dinner with the family after an intense round of cat and mouse. At the dinner table, both of them interrogate each other about their battle wounds in hopes hopes to get information out of one another, to no avail.
You have a scratch on your neck.
Yes, I met a girl on Craigslist.
Seemingly out of nowhere, Lou and Lance decide to leave right in the middle of dinner. With Lou and Lance out of the picture, Rick and Jill can finally have some alone time. Sadly for the pair, their moments are quickly bombarded with Aunt Lucille's gases? Just as they start getting closer to each other despite the intense noises, Hourglass literally breaks into the home, destroying it in the process. The villain attacks Rick, causing him to pass out and landing Aunt Lucille in the hospital. There, our hero receives good and bad news. Good news, Uncle Albert woke up from his coma. Bad news, Aunt Lucille did not make it. That's rough. Albert's doctor asks Rick to not tell his uncle about Aunt Lucille's death, as such heavy news could potentially damage his health. Of course, the doctor casually mentions it.
Mr. Adams, you have a visitor.
Following Aunt Lucille's advice of keeping the ones he loves safe, Rick tells Jill he doesn't want to see her anymore. Of course, he spirals into a depression, growing a fake beard and doing nothing all day. At home, Trey and Uncle Albert, again why are they together, attempt to lift Rick's spirits, encouraging to finally defeat Hourglass, the man that took Aunt Lucille away from them. Luckily for them, the villain is conveniently about to attack an event. Yay! Fighting murderous villains who want to be immortal. Without another word, Trey, Uncle Albert, and Rick set off on their quest. At the event, Rick, who is clueless about the Hourglass identity, finds Lou, asking him for help finding the culprit. As anyone would, Lou misguides him and sends him in a completely different direction. Or rather, Dalai Lama's direction, beating him when he founds him. Yeah, we're not sure how he got there either. As the fight breaks out, Jill finds out Hourglass is none other than Lou Lander. Surprise, surprise!
Surprise!
During Hourglass and Firefly's final showdown, the villain sets off an attack that wounds Jill, as she was sacrificing herself for the hero. This gives Rick some leverage, quickly catching up to Hourglass just as he is about to kill thousands of people to become immortal. With one of the villain's weapons, Rick manages to stop Lou, successfully defeating Hourglass. Hooray! As Jill wakes up, she discovers Rick's identity, excitedly kissing him as the film comes to an end. And that's all for today. Superhero movie in a nutshell. Let me know in the comments which movie I should do next. And of course, if you like this video, you already know what to do. See you next time for a new summary on an old comedy movie.